Let's talk about the moment that often goes unnoticed, but is actually the most telling sign that an avoidant is falling for you. They start showing up, not with fireworks, not with poetic words or grand romantic gestures, but with something far more powerful: presence. And here's the kicker: even when it terrifies them. See, for someone with an avoidant attachment style, closeness isn't a comfort, it's a threat. Proximity makes them feel like they're losing control. Emotional intimacy, it's a red alert in their nervous system. So when they begin to break their own patterns, when they lean into closeness instead of fleeing from it, you're witnessing the equivalent of a silent scream. Their presence is their confession. Their time is their love letter. This is where most people miss the mark. You expect emotional validation in your language, words, attention, romance. But an avoidant speaks a different dialect of love. And the moment they begin to override their instinct to pull away, not because they're healed, not because they're fixed, but because their connection to you is overriding their programming, that's the moment you're witnessing transformation. Think about that. This isn't just behavior. It's rebellion against their own defenses. It's not natural for them. It's not automatic. It's actually deeply unnatural for them to seek proximity. So if they're showing up, if they're calling instead of disappearing, if they're offering to see you instead of waiting for you to chase, it's because something inside of them is shifting. Not out of obligation, but out of emotional necessity. Now let's go deeper. Presence in this case is not just physical. It's energetic, it's psychological, it's spiritual. When an avoidant starts falling in love, they may not say the words, "I miss you," but they'll start looking for reasons to be near you. They'll create excuses to text you. They'll show up when you're sick. They'll hover around you in silence, not knowing how to connect, but desperate to stay close. They're not trying to seduce you. They're trying to stay regulated in a situation that used to trigger their panic. You become their paradox. You terrify them and comfort them simultaneously. And the moment they begin choosing closeness over escape, that's not just falling in love. That's surrender. Most people chase validation. You want someone to love you in the way you understand love, but power lies in learning how others express it. The avoidant doesn't say, "I love you" with flowers. They say it by not running. They say it by remaining in the room. They say it when they choose to stay present in discomfort rather than retreat to the silence they've always known. I want you to imagine how much internal conflict that creates for someone who spent their entire life believing that closeness equals pain. To start choosing connection, that's not just affection. That's a reprogramming of identity. Presence for an avoidant is a form of personal evolution. It is their nervous system rewriting a decades-old script. It is their trauma adapting to something new, safety in intimacy. And you must understand this. Presence from an avoidant is sacred ground. It's not about what they say. It's about what they're not doing. They're not leaving. They're not escaping. They're not ghosting. That's love, coded in silence. But here's the part that separates those who truly understand emotional maturity from those still stuck in ego. You can't demand it. You can't force them to show up before they're ready. Their presence, when it finally comes, is not the product of your pressure. It's the product of your stability. When you become an emotional anchor rather than a storm, their system relaxes around you. That's when they start showing up. And when they do, when they finally step into the space they used to avoid, your job is not to attack them with expectations. Your job is to recognize the weight of what's happening. This is not a casual gesture. It's their soul inching closer to yours with every step they take. You don't celebrate that with neediness. You honor it with presence of your own. Love, especially from someone who's avoidant, is never loud. It's not going to come in the form of declarations and constant attention. It's going to be subtle, uncomfortable, and sometimes painfully slow. But when you realize that their very act of being there, despite every fiber in their body screaming to run, that's when you'll see it. That's when you'll know. They're not just showing up, they're following. And every time they choose to stay, they're telling you the truth. See, I don't know how to do this perfectly, but I'm trying for you. Let that be enough for now. Because that is love in its rarest, rawest, most honest form. Let's break a myth wide open, because this one is destroying more relationships than you realize. Most people think when someone avoids conflict, it means they're calm, controlled, chill. But in reality, avoidance of emotional conflict isn't calm at all. It's panic in disguise. It's the trauma response of someone whose nervous system was trained to equate confrontation with danger. So when you're dealing with an avoidant lover, silence after a disagreement doesn't mean they don't care. It means their fight or flight system just sprinted for the exit. But here's where it gets real. When that avoidance starts staying in the discomfort, when they don't disappear during conflict, when they don't shut down or ghost, that's the moment you know they're not just attached to you, they're invested. Emotionally, spiritually, subconsciously. Because for them, staying in conflict is not just difficult, it's terrifying. And love, real love, is the only thing powerful enough to keep them there. Now let's be honest, arguments are uncomfortable for anyone. But for the avoidant, conflict feels like a trap. Their history, whether childhood instability, emotional neglect, or toxic past relationships, wire them to believe that confrontation equals abandonment, that voicing needs leads to rejection, that sticking around in an emotional mess is a guaranteed pathway to pain. So their system learned one thing: distance equals safety. That's why early in a relationship, when tensions rise, they vanish, they go silent, they retreat into their cave, and you're left wondering, did they ever care? Was it all in my head? But here's the twist. When an avoidant falls for you, they start overriding that instinct, not because they've mastered emotional intelligence, but because you become more important than their fear. And that shift is massive. They're not staying because it's comfortable. They're staying because you matter enough to be uncomfortable for. That's what most people miss. You see them silent and assume it's indifference. But when they start leaning in, sitting with the discomfort, staying present when they want to vanish, you are witnessing a revolution. Not a romantic gesture, a neurological rebellion against their own trauma. Let's go even deeper. When an avoidant chooses to stay during an emotionally charged moment, what they're really doing is risking identity death. Their whole internal system is screaming for escape. Their heart rate is up. Their gut is tight. Their brain is saying, this is unsafe. Get out. Shut it down. But then something else whispers, stay. Don't run. She's worth it. And that whisper, that's love. They won't always get it right. Sometimes they'll freeze. Sometimes they'll shut down mid-discussion and need time. But they'll come back. They'll re-engage. Not perfectly, but persistently. That's the hallmark of an avoidant who is falling. They return to the fire. They stop fearing that conflict will destroy the connection. Instead, they begin to believe, just barely, that maybe this time conflict could strengthen it. That belief, that's evolution. We often think love looks like flowers, dates, good times. But for someone avoidant, love is choosing to fight the urge to vanish. Love is staying in the room. Love is holding eye contact when it hurts. Love is saying, I don't know how to do this, but I'm trying. And that kind of love, it's not loud, it's not always clear, but it is profound. You see, the highest form of intimacy is not found in perfection. It's found in the willingness to struggle through imperfection together. And when your partner, who is wired to escape, starts choosing to stay, not just physically, but emotionally, you're witnessing more than affection. You're witnessing transformation. That's not romance, that's reprogramming. So if you're in a relationship with an avoidant, pay attention to the moments they choose discomfort over distance. When they sit in the storm with you instead of running for shelter. When they ask, "Are you okay?" even when their instinct is to disconnect. These moments are not small, they are monumental. And let me tell you something else. This is where trust is built. Not in the good days, but in the tension. When your avoidant partner stays in the mess with you, they're not just telling you they care. They're proving that your connection has become a force stronger than their fear. That you somehow have become safer than their solitude. That's when everything changes. Because conflict doesn't destroy love, avoidance does. But when avoidance turns into engagement, when their silence turns into presence, that's love at its raw. It's not polished, it's not rehearsed, but it's real. So the next time the storm rolls in, don't just ask, did we argue? Ask, did they stay? Because if they stayed, they leaned in, even shake. If they engaged, even imperfectly, that's not dysfunction. That's love learning how to fight for something for you. Most people think falling in love is all about what someone gives you. Attention, affection, time, consistency. And yes, those are important. But when it comes to avoidant individuals, the most intimate thing they can ever give you isn't what they do for you, it's what they reveal to you. Avoidants build their lives behind emotional vaults. They're the masters of composure, self-control, emotional distance. Why? Because their earliest blueprint of love taught them that vulnerability equals danger. They learned that if they opened up, they'd get hurt. That if they showed their wounds, someone would poke them instead of heal them. So over time, they made a deal with themselves. If I don't let anyone in, no one can destroy me. That's why the relationships are often filled with surface level interactions. They can be charming, intelligent, even attentive, but there's always this unspoken glass wall. You can see them, but you can't get to them. And if you try to reach too far, too fast, they retreat. Not because you're entering the territory they've been trained to guard with their life. Now listen closely. When an avoidant starts falling for you, something begins to shift. You'll start to notice cracks in the armor. They may not confess their love with words, but one day, out of nowhere, they'll share a story about their childhood that made them the way they are. Or they'll admit something they regret, something they've never told anyone. And you'll feel it. The room gets heavier, and the energy drops into something real. This is not random. This is not small talk. This is massive. Because for them to even open that vault an inch is like walking naked through fire. It's not about the story. It's about what it costs them to tell it. Let's go deeper. An avoidant sharing their emotional truth is an act of spiritual exposure. It's not about information. It's about identity. They're not just giving you a glimpse of what happened to them. They're letting you see who they really are behind the persona. And that moment is sacred. Because that's the very thing they've been protecting their whole life. Not their ego, their essence. And this is where this entire paradigm shifts, because most people misinterpret vulnerability. You think if someone's crying, they're being vulnerable. But for avoidance, crying can be mechanical, performative. What's real for them is when they drop their guard and let you into the story behind their silence. That's the treasure, that's the confession, that's the love. When they let you in, what they're really saying is, I trust you with the parts of me I hate. Not just the scars they got from others, but the shame they carry within themselves. The self-doubt, the fear of being too much or not enough. And the moment you see that, you're not just their partner, you're their mirror. You become the only person in their world who sees the unfiltered version and still chooses them. You want to know how you can tell they're falling? It's when they start hating their own defenses. They'll open up and then panic. They'll push you away after a deep moment of connection. They'll go cold after showing warmth. But if you stay steady, if you don't overreact to the withdrawal, if you just hold your ground in love, They'll come back, slowly, but with more truth. That pattern? Push, reveal, retreat, return. That's not emotional immaturity. That's emotional detox. It's how love rewires an avoidant brain. Because remember, what feels natural to them is disconnection. So connection hurts, it burns. But if they're willing to risk that pain over and over just to be close to you, that's the loudest, clearest declaration of love they'll ever get. If you're on the receiving end of that moment, when they finally crack the vault, even for a second, don't miss it. Don't belittle it. Don't ask for more. Just be present with it. Because that single act of opening up costs them more than you can imagine. It's the same as someone handing you their heart, trembling and unsure, and saying, please don't drop this. There's the difference between shallow love and deep connection. Shallow love needs constant proof. Deep connection recognizes the silent confessions, the moments that don't look like love on the surface, but are love in its rawest, most terrifying form. So the next time an avoidant shares something personal, dark, or uncomfortable, don't rush past it. Don't interrogate it. Honor it. Because you're not just being trusted, you're being chosen. And that moment of revelation, that's not just a story. That's them whispering, I'm falling. And I don't know how to stop. And that is everything. You want to know one of the most overlooked signs that an avoidant is falling in love? It's not passion. It's not affection. It's not even verbal expression. It's sacrifice. Especially the ones you never asked for. That's when you know they're shifting. Not because you pulled them, not because you convinced them, but because something in them is moving on its own toward you. See, avoidants are masters of control. Every piece of their life is structured to preserve emotional independence. Their time is theirs. Their space is sacred. Their routines are built like armor. It's how they maintain a sense of safety in a world that has always felt emotionally unpredictable. To them, autonomy isn't just a preference, it's survival. So when they begin voluntarily adjusting that structure to make room for you, that's not just interest, that's emotional significance. Think about it. An avoidant who's still playing games will never inconvenience themselves. If they feel even slightly overwhelmed, they'll distance, distract, or disappear. But when they start showing up differently, when they reschedule things just to see you, when they change their daily flow, when they choose closeness over comfort, those are sacrifices to them. Tiny to you, but massive to them. Because what you're witnessing is a subconscious recalibration. You're no longer just someone they enjoy. You're someone they're prioritizing. And they won't announce it. They won't say, hey, look what I'm doing for you. No. Avoidants are subtle, often silent, but the clues are there if you know how to read them. They'll start to text you more consistently, not because they suddenly enjoy small talk, but because they know it makes you feel secure. They'll make room in their weekend plans, not because they don't value their solitude, but because your presence is starting to feel like home. They'll shift behaviors they once claimed were just how I am, not because you demanded change, but because your connection made it worth the effort. That's where the real transformation happens. And here's what makes it so powerful. It's not compliance. It's not submission. It's internal willingness. They're not sacrificing out of fear of losing you. They're doing it because the bond they feel is becoming stronger than their fear of closeness. That's a tectonic shift. That's not just someone liking you. That's someone rewriting the boundaries they once swore they'd never cross. You've got to understand the psychology of this. Avoidants don't naturally adjust. They don't go with the flow in love. They manage distance to regulate emotion. So when they make a sacrifice, it's not casual. It's surgical. It means they thought about it. They weighed the cost and they still chose you. Let me give you an example. Imagine an avoidant who never travels for anyone. They value their environment, their control, their predictability. But one day, they offer to visit you, even if it takes them out of their comfort zone. That's not just a gesture. That's vulnerability disguised as logistics. That's their version of, you matter enough for me to stretch. And don't get it twisted, it won't always look romantic. Sometimes the sacrifice is emotional. Maybe they give up a defense mechanism. Maybe they stop interrupting when you're expressing yourself. Maybe they don't shut down during a vulnerable moment. Those seem small, but to them, those are massive shifts. They're surrendering something they've clung to for years. For you, what does that tell you? It tells you that love for the avoidant isn't a feeling, it's a decision. A slow, uncomfortable, calculated decision to open doors they once kept locked. A choice to move toward closeness when every cell in their body still wants to retreat. They may not say, I'm in love with you. But when they sacrifice the very things they built to protect themselves, they're telling you in a far deeper language, you're worth the risk. And your role in this, pay attention, not to what they say, but to what they give up. Not because you asked them to, but because they chose to. Because love that grows in silence is still love. And for the avoidant, it's the kind that costs the most. So the next time they shift something in their life, however small, to make space for you, don't miss it. Don't overlook it because it's not loud. Don't dismiss it because it's not verbal. Recognize it for what it is. The quiet confession of a heart learning to love against its own wiring. Because at the end of the day, it's not the easy things that prove love. It's the things we're willing to let go of to keep it. There's a moment in every avoidance journey through love where their internal compass begins to spin. The very wiring that told them to protect, withdraw, and stay self-reliant starts to short circuit. And this shift is subtle, but it's seismic. You'll know it's happening when they stop guarding themselves from your influence and start letting you shape them. See, for an avoidant, autonomy isn't just a habit, it's a core identity. From an early age, they learned that the only way to stay safe was to be self-sufficient. They became their own parent, their own emotional regulator, their own protector. So when they get into a relationship, even if they care deeply, they don't trust interdependence. They may love you, but they'll still filter everything through the question, how do I maintain control? That's why you often feel like you're with someone who listens but doesn't shift. Someone who's there but somehow untouched. Because they're living behind an internal firewall, guarding themselves not just from you, but from being changed by you. But love, real love, disrupts that. When an avoidant begins falling deeply for you, something unexpected happens. They start to soften, not just in how they speak to you, but in how they receive you. Your words carry more weight. Your reactions influence their behavior. Your needs become something they start thinking about, even when you're not around. And they don't do it out of pressure or obligation. They do it because suddenly you matter more than their resistance. And this is a major sign they're falling. You start to have impact. You affect them. You move them. You don't have to fight for space anymore. They make room for your perspective. That is one of the rarest shifts you'll ever see in someone with an avoidant attachment style. Because for them, change has always been associated with loss of control. But when they choose to evolve, not because you demanded it, but because they value you, it's not just growth, it's trust. You might notice it in how they start handling conflict. Maybe before they'd shut down or escape when you express pain, but now they pause, they listen, they reflect. Or maybe they used to mock or dismiss your emotional needs, and now they ask questions, not perfectly, but intentionally. That's the shift. They're no longer guarding themselves from being affected. They're opening the gate tentatively, but sincerely. This is where people often misunderstand the avoidant. They confuse resistance with arrogance. But most avoidants aren't arrogant. They're afraid. Afraid of being controlled, afraid of losing themselves, afraid of being engulfed. So when they let you shape them, when they start accepting your influence, They're doing something terrifying. They're entrusting you with part of their identity. And that's sacred ground. Because when someone who has built their life around emotional independence says your thoughts matter to me, they're not just giving you a voice. They're giving you access. Access to a place they don't even let themselves go very often. The part of them that's willing to adapt, compromise, and evolve for love. But here's what you need to understand. This influence you now have is not a weapon, it's a responsibility. You have to handle it with care. Because the moment they open up to being changed by you, they're vulnerable in a way they've never been. You're not just speaking into their behavior, you're shaping the very architecture of their emotional world. And if you handle that recklessly, if you manipulate, control, or guilt trip, you don't just push them away. You teach them that opening up was a mistake. So if you see that they're starting to let you in, if they start considering your perspective, trying to meet your needs, or even changing a long-held pattern, don't miss it. Don't bulldoze through it with entitlement. Pause and recognize the magnitude of what's happening. You're witnessing the beginning of transformation, not because they're submitting to your will, but because love has disrupted their programming. You know what that tells you? That love doesn't always break down walls with passion. Sometimes love reprograms resistance with consistency, with truth, with presence. And when that happens, when your voice starts echoing inside someone who used to listen only to fear, that's not just connection, that's conversion. You didn't just touch their heart. You rewired their instincts. And now they're choosing to become someone new with you. Never take that lightly. Because when an avoidant begins to shift their internal world, because of your presence in their life, you are no longer just a partner. You've become a mirror of their becoming. And that's where love becomes transformative, not just for them, but for you too. There's a quiet shift that happens when an avoidant lover stops running from love and starts leaning into it. And it often shows up in a way that most people completely miss, because it doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't come with some big confession. It comes when they stop trying to simply keep you and start trying to earn you. See, avoidants are wired to protect themselves. That's your primary relationship strategy. Don't get too close. Don't get too vulnerable. Don't rely on anyone else emotionally. So at the beginning of most relationships, they're not focused on depth. They're focused on control. They want to feel safe, untouchable, unbothered. So instead of investing emotionally, they keep just enough distance to feel powerful, but just enough connection to keep you close. But when love starts breaking through their armor, when their attachment to you becomes stronger than their addiction to avoidance, something incredible begins to unfold. They start to look at themselves differently. They stop asking, how do I keep this person interested without losing myself, and start asking, how do I become someone who deserves this level of connection? And that shift, that's not just emotional, that's existential. Because they're not just rearranging behavior, they're reevaluating identity. They begin to realize that proximity isn't enough. Just being physically present doesn't mean they're emotionally contributing. And if they want to keep the connection alive, if they want to be worthy of the love they're finally allowing themselves to receive, they've got to grow. Not because you told them to, but because love is demanding something deeper from them. Something real, something raw, something honest. You'll notice they start becoming more intentional. They begin showing up with a kind of consistency that was once foreign to them. Not because they've suddenly become romantic superheroes, but because they're starting to take emotional responsibility. They begin asking more questions, listening more closely, being more sensitive to how their patterns affect you. And here's the key, they do it without being told. That's when you know something powerful is happening. When an avoidant is just trying to keep you, they'll do the bare minimum. They'll show up enough to keep your anxiety low, enough to prevent a breakup, enough to look engaged, but they won't give their full self. It's all strategic. But when they're falling for you on a soul level, they start to initiate effort. They begin to think ahead. They begin to consider your needs even when you're not voicing them. They don't just want to be around you, they want to be good for you. That's the difference. They're no longer performing love, they're learning how to live it. And that's hard for someone who's spent a lifetime retreating from emotional demands. The realization that true love requires growth, requires selflessness, can feel overwhelming. But if they stick around, if they start choosing evolution over comfort, engagement over